Hello, everyone. Welcome to Vantage Point, a North Star Report talk show. Our North Star Report mission is to light the way to freedom from unlawful discrimination. In our talk show series, we will introduce you to people from various industries where racism and sexism exists. We will reveal the systems in those industries that are designed to maintain that racism and sexism. Our goal is to enlighten you so you can see what is really happening and understand the steps towards freedom from that oppression. This will be done by individual examples provided by our guests from various industries. They have experienced unlawful discrimination, and they're doing something about it. Then, we will reveal the systemic nature of that oppression within each of those industries, which have an effect on our daily lives. Welcome to Vantage Point. This is the first show, so I'm a little nervous and all that. Yeah, okay, well, we're going to get through this because your case is important. And by the way, I completely missed this. The deposition thing.
Yes.
Okay, you said that they responded. I'm sure there were a bunch of objections.
They sent a Dropbox, and what they did was my lawyer requested their discovery.
Mm.
Which their discovery, I mean, to me, as a law enforcement officer, if it was my case and I was investigating it, it's weak. Like, it's very weak. And I got a call while I was talking to you on the phone from an officer from Hope Mills. Actually, it was the one that was in that's the other investigation. He said a commissioner came up to him and wants to talk to me, which I don't think is a good idea. He says something's not right. He's like, something's wrong here. He said, I need to know what's going on because Hope Mills is being very vague. Something's not right. I need to talk to her. And I said, I can't talk to him.
Of course not.
He can talk to my lawyer, but I can't talk to him.
Yeah. No. This is, I'm a military person. So I speak from that standpoint. If you're dealing with an opponent, or an enemy, if you want to use that term, you try different tactics. You have legal representation. Everything goes through your legal representation. End of story.
Right.
Like what we're doing is just something to accentuate, but that's your right of free speech.
Right.
There is no other church than those two.
Right.
And if they're trying to speak with you, they need to go through, and maybe they want to try to negotiate or whatever, but more than likely, I'm sorry to say, Antoinette, we're dealing with arrogance.
Oh, I learned.
Yeah.
I didn't know they were that arrogant, but they are.
Yeah.
Well, they have power, and they're trying to enforce their power on somebody small like me. But what they didn't anticipate is for me to continue to fight. They're trying to weaken me, but I'm not gonna give up. It's not my blood. I'm just not going to.
You say
so I can't fight them, and I feel like I've already made a change. They've already started. They hired their first black lieutenant ever in history since Hope Mills has been 1930, I think. Never been a black lieutenant ever. So I feel like I've already made a change. That's my feeling. So whether they wanted to change or not, they had to.
You're definitely a catalyst, an agent of change, and it isn't just change. I always, when I speak, I talk about, imagine if a person needed brain surgery, would you not want the best, the brightest, the first, person to do this? And in your situation, here you are, providing all of this. None of this should have happened. We shouldn't be here. Antoinette, my first question to you is, as a woman of color, why did you choose to become a police officer?
Okay, well, I decided to become a law enforcement officer because I thought I was going to make a difference in the lives of others. And to some extent, I feel that I have, and yet that I think that my work was cut short. It was unfortunate. And unfortunately, it was due to discrimination within my own department. I was a major crime detective, and when my career ended, I was a juvenile detective, which I felt was very fulfilling for me. Advocating for victims and helping families who were struggling due to unique issues that they faced by juveniles in today's world, it was my passion. Pursuing pedophiles and predators and bringing them to justice is what drove me every day. And seeing the ugly things that, people or humans are capable of doing, you know, that can stay in the fight for myself. And believe me, the fight that I'm in right now, it's a lonely place to be.
Yes.
And thankfully, I have my family and I have people like you that, support me.
When you talk about your passion in terms of helping people, this is part of America. As a patriot, you have done so much,
Exactly.
and I salute you for that.
And I think that, we all, I see everybody as unique, but I think we all should be as one, if that makes any sense.
Yes. Yes.
In order for everything to kind of flow uh, like a smooth creek, I guess is the way I would see it.
Yes. Yes. And so, what was it like? I mean, as you created this smooth flow within your own, pathway as a law enforcement officer, what was it like for you in law enforcement?
Well, during my tenure of law enforcement, I've become intimately with families and friends, and I've seen families struggle through difficult times, uncertain times, because we live in an uncertain world, of course. And each case that I dealt with was unique and it was different for me as an officer. And I'm 5'5", and I don't weigh but 120 pounds. So, for me to go every day was like borrowed time. I didn't know what each call I would get, like a 911 call. What am I going to walk into? And there's no amount of training that can train me for what I'm going to go into, because I don't know every day. It's unique in its own manner. The goal for me was to give respect to each person I dealt with. And I'm a person that believes that if you give respect, you'll get respect back. Because when you encounter a person, it's going to escalate to a point. Each individual encounter is unique, and it can escalate, and you do not know what it's going to escalate to. But as long as you have that respect for each individual that's involved, that's what you need as an officer to gain that respect back from, say it's a criminal, say it's just a person you're dealing with. Your whole point at the end of the day is to protect the public, regardless. Like in a scenario, I'm coming up with a 6'4" individual that's 230 pounds. In that escalation, it's going to be much different from my coworker that's a male subject. He's 6'1", he's 200 pounds. Well, if this person becomes aggressive with me, I'm in the fight for my life. So that's going to be a different scenario from the officer I work with. Throughout any and all my times of dealing with the public, I've always felt that while I was there in this situation, if something escalated and it was broken down to the point that intervention is required, if you have mutual respect for each other, it's going to de-escalate and potentially, when you go into a situation, you have emotions is just driven as an officer and with the public, and it's high intensity. So I believe, officer safety, we have to be safe, involving everybody that's there, but also you got to keep it de-escalated. for both sides. Safety of all that's involved, including if arrest is needed, but that we all resort and it's based on the situation. And our job is to save lives, to protect the public, and a lot of times you're working on extremely gray areas with limitation of information at best, and you are asked to use your best judgment. And sometimes emotions are high, and the situation can be intense and potentially dangerous. So there are times, however, as like with Mr. George Floyd, and I'd like to mention him, where no matter the situation, using wanton and excessive force in the manner that caused death is unacceptable in our job, especially when you had the individual under control, and it was under control, that situation. Because the badge is supposed to be a symbol of public trust, and incidents like this, it tarnishes the badge. And it makes the job harder for us, the ones that are trying to do the right thing. And I understand doing this job that anyone who is placed under detention and while we arrest, it's not a comfortable situation. It's not meant to be comfortable while we're trying to de-escalate a situation. And we understand that. However, during this de-escalation, it depends on the subject's behavior, but unwanted and unused of force is not necessary. Again, we are there with a badge, and we're supposed to represent and protect. We're there to protect and serve the public. At the end, that's what it's all about.
Antoinette, I fully understand and appreciate everything you said, and I agree with everything you said. I mean, there's that is something that most people don't understand. So you're a great police officer. You were a great police officer. We haven't talked about that yet. But you obviously have your heart in the right place, and your mind, and all of your abilities. What was it like to experience unlawful discrimination? Or did you experience unlawful discrimination? And if so, please speak to it.
Okay. Well, I don't think that anyone can argue that racism in our country is still present, because it is. And it's unfortunate that it happens within the police department. It's a woven fabric of our system and our justice system, in fact. And we can just see it like in the history of our nation. We can see it, we can feel it. And you see it in social media, you see it everywhere. But to that end, I was a victim of racism and discrimination as a police officer, which I felt was the worst kind, and it was unfair. And my thing is, if you're a police officer and you're having to go under the scrutiny every day in your own police department, how can you go out in the public and do your job and feel good about it? However, it's the worst kind to have. And, in your own agency, and you're being discriminated against, the officers, because of your gender, your race, your skin color, whatever, and that falls under, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Yes. There's also great officers who are minority, non-minority, alike, who are fighting to get rid of these individuals and to maintain the public's trust. I was one of them in this situation, and it shows that the fight is real. It's there. It exists. It's ongoing. And my situation, it's a struggle, and I'm still dealing with it. I was fired because I spoke up. I spoke up about what was going on within the organization.
Wow.
Not only was I fired, there was another female fired, 2 black males that were fired, and another male subject that was fired. I'm a Native American, a Lumbee Indian out of Robeson County. I was the only Native American they had in the police department, which is unique within itself, because it's very rare where I came from that Indians just we don't progress, and I hate to say it, education wise. They just don't have that opportunity. I was fortunate enough, I had the opportunity to progress in my life, and I was very proud of what I did. But yes, in America, discrimination and racism is very prevalent, and we wear that badge, and it's entrusted in us to protect and serve the public. that should not be part of being a police officer. It's discrimination against people and racism against their color. It should not be a part of us as police officers. We're here to be called upon. We have a duty, and that's not part of it.
Yes. So, can you give us some examples, like were you treated differently than your peers while you were working?
I was. I was there 10 years in my police department, and inadequate equipment. I watched people come under me 5 or 6 years later that was given new cars. I never received a new car. When it came to my time to get a new car, all of a sudden it changed, like the requirements changed. One, it was always like mileage, but when it came to me to get it, it was mileage in year. Education, I was always denied classes, and then I decided to go do a class on my own during my vacation time, and they even tried to interfere with that. They called and tried to get me out of the class on my own vacation time. I was promoted to a detective, and I had to take a board. I watched people they didn't have to go through boards. They didn't have to do the same thing I did. They were given positions, high positions, just because they fit into that good old boy system they had going on. When it came to me becoming a detective, they had me working the road and working the detective job, not paying me before being a police officer. I had to even write a grievance on that, and the town had to get involved and say, hey, this police officer, why are you not giving her this position? Eventually, I did receive being a detective, and I got back there, and I inherited 349 cases from a prior detective, and I'm just going to say it, he was a white male. He got to retire. Now, eventually, I inherited those 349 cases. Eventually, in 2020, was wrote up because I could not keep up with the standards. Even though I was given more, they wanted me to fall under the same standards as everyone else. I eventually realized the chess game that they were playing. They wanted to promote a white officer to our sergeant's position, which was black. I was the next to promote. That was not going to happen in that police department. I was female and I was Indian. So when I made the last grievance, I was wrote up on 9 cases on my dashboard. Ever in history has that ever happened there. Never happened in the police department.
Amazing.
So I was wrote up. I stood up and fought finally, and just told everything that was going on. And in the meeting, I was put on probation. Before the paper was even dry, I was suspended. Before that paper was even dry, I was terminated. I had perfect evaluations for 10 years. No complaints. I've never been wrote up. I was wrote up because my car got stuck in the mud. Nobody's ever been wrote up for being stuck in the mud, but I was. And when I say the department I worked for was mostly white, and the minorities they had there, they basically fired. Or they found something to fire them on. So yes, there was racism, and yes, I was discriminated upon every day.
You're a fighter. What have you done about it?
I filed with the EEOC, which they gave me the right to sue. My case is still ongoing, and I'm still fighting strong. I have confidence in my lawyer that justice will prevail. I feel like, that I'm making a change just by standing up, because I feel like the next minority that comes along, I feel like I'm fighting for them also. So I'm continuously in the lawsuit now. So I'm not going to give up until there's a final answer from some higher being somewhere. And even when they say no, I'm still going to fight. If I have to make the world know, that's what I'm going to do. You're helping me right now with my fight. I want everybody to know this should not happen. I don't care what, your race, your gender, whatever, it should not be happening.
Yes. I want everyone to know that this is the first show that the North Star Report talk show has ever done. And I think this is the best show. I think you've made a statement. I want everyone to know as well that as part of a segment to this show, we'll have Antoinette's husband, and I'll just mention his first name, Carl. And Carl, I know you'll see this. We could edit this part of it, and so forth.
Yeah.
But I expect you to share your perspective. And folks, Carl is another hero. He is in the U.S. military service, and I won't say any more than that because there's certain things that it's best that you hear for yourself.
I
But
would like to say one more thing.
yes,
Mentioned on that to advocate, him fighting for this country and then people, doing the stuff that they're doing, like discriminating, like against me and other minorities. He has gave them that freedom.
wow.
Given everybody, when he fights, he's actually given us the freedom to live here and to enjoy life. And this is what they do with their freedom, is they still go out there and target people and harass people because of the color of their skin and because of who they are, in which they shouldn't. When he's out there giving, he could give his life for that. He not to not come back, and he's fighting for us to have the freedom to live here in peace. But yet, you got people out here that still want to discriminate and to harass on a daily basis, and this is how they give appreciation to him as a warrior. But I want to advocate on that. That's what I want to say.
Thank you, Antoinette. I mean, that was very important because people often forget, that our equality and freedom, they're not free. I mean, this is something that, and what you're going through, and we're with you. And there will be, I'm sure when people hear that there'll be plenty of support. But what you're going through is something that I hope to show is part of a system of discrimination.
Yes.
You are a hero. You are making a difference, and you're fighting, and you're not letting it go. And we hope that others will see you and say, "I want to be like her." I'm going to stand up. I won't let this happen. Because honestly, at the end of this show, I wanted to be clear. This is not a condemnation of the police departments across this nation. We will have another guest, hopefully, that'll be dovetailing on this from the West Coast. You're on the East Coast. But talking about discrimination that is like a cancer upon our nation in various ways. But at the end of the day, we must make a better day. We must wake up and understand that this type of thing needs to stop. Because if it doesn't stop, we'll continue to see if this is what you're going through at the police department, before you even go out into the field,
Right.
it's kind of like an incubator. There are many, many good people that can just stand up and say, okay, enough is enough, and let's treat each other well, or treat each other equally. But it begins with dismantling the system that makes it so that, I believe you told me earlier how you would actually get sick just to go to work. Sometimes it would bother you so much, to know that you're about to go into, oh, here we go again.
A hostile environment is what it is.
Yes. And that needs to stop because at the different levels of industry, that's where the true sexism and racism exists. And if we can begin to understand that, then we could begin to find solutions. So I thank you
Right.
so much, Antoinette.
No, I appreciate you guys
Yes, you've
for
said so
having my
much.
back and listening,
Yes.
putting my voice out there. And I would like to say too that during my tenure there, I even got my 4-year degree, and I'm not looking for attaboys from nobody. I don't need an attaboy, but at least as leadership there, you could at least acknowledge, hey, and I was one of 2 in the entire department that had a 4-year degree.
Wow.
And they still fought me on promoting me. They still fought me to the very end. They refused, and even threw it in my face. You know, they might as well have come up to me and said, "Look, you're female and you're lumpy Indian. We're not promoting you.
Yeah.
You can forget it. It's not happening." I mean, they might as well have said that
Yes.
because everything they did suggested it
Yes.
very clearly.
Yes. Yes. Well, I commend you for your courage and your strength. This fight is not done yet.
No, it's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
We will continue.
Yes, we will continue. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Antoinette. It's a
Thank
really
you.
pleasure. Really a wonderful pleasure to meet with you.
Thank you.
I'm Carl Hurd. I'm Antoinette's husband. I'm a military member. I'm currently deployed. So the original writing of this was because we've been engaged in for almost 2 years in a federal lawsuit against the Hope Mills Police Department. They damaged my wife's good name. They impacted our family. They prevented her from rebuilding her life, her good name. And she experienced something that I just equate to being horrific. And others are still going through that process at that police department, some of whom still work there. I think the leadership within the town represents kind of the worst fibers woven into the fabric of America, with its discrimination, retaliation, and disregard for the equal and civil rights of protected class citizens employed within that town. So for me, I met my wife back in 2012, as I was finishing up Special Forces assessment and selection. She was a police officer at Hope Mills Police Department. And then as she progressed throughout her career, she became a juvenile detective, advocating for victims, ensuring that, pedophiles and others that would do harm to our children and youth were brought to justice. And I think that that's a commendable job to have. I know that there's always been friction points between our law enforcement and the community, but I think that generally speaking, most people support, and would support a detective who's working to keep our children safe. As a Native American female, she's had a long her heritage has had a long history of discrimination, almost to the point of extinction. And she chose to give back, through law enforcement, which is something she's very good at. As for me, I've been in the military serving for over 22 years, some of the most challenging and austere environments in the world. I've learned to follow, and I use that as a pathway to become a leader. To that end, I've learned that leadership is about empowerment and enablement, leveraging the inherent creativity, ingenuity, and talents inherent to our subordinates, regardless of their race, gender, religion, or protected status, so that we can accomplish the mission. And for me, we've always said best person for the job is the one who should get the job. As a special forces officer, we're charged with national level priority, the work of law enforcement, the protection they provide for my family when I'm away. My wife was one of those individuals, and it gave me a vested interest in helping to provide our police officers any advantage that I'm able to give them through my training and experiences. And to that end, I, alongside others within my regiment, have helped develop unique bonds to our local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. Early in my wife's career, I volunteered time. I trained some of their officers out on the ranges and other classes, weaponry and things, to give them an advantage to fight, in the fight against crime. Because at the end of the day, we want our law enforcement officers to come home alive. And so, it was with a heavy heart and kind of extreme disappointment, that we did all of those things and tried to work together as part of the community, bridge some of those gaps, and then to watch what happened to my own family. Bottom line is the badge should represent a symbol of public trust. And in that place, it's tarnished. And honestly, it requires an investigation into its methods and practices, some of which at best are unethical and at worst are discriminative, retaliatory, and illegal with regards to due process and the civil rights of protected class individuals. Regardless of race or gender, I think each officer should be treated fairly without discrimination, marginalization, or retaliation. And on another note, I find it difficult that we can, mend the the divides and the gaps that we have between our law enforcement and our community when these types of things are happening within the law enforcement department. And I don't think that, enough attention has been paid to what officers within these organizations have had to endure, especially the minorities. So along her career, we started noticing that certain officers, namely minorities and females, were held to a different standard, unequal standard, than their non-protected class counterparts. The application of punitive measures was more subjective, based on biased and standardized, based on an operating procedure common and fair to all. The practice notably started affecting my wife when she applied for the detective position. It started with, though her being one of the most qualified and despite being recommended to be first by members of the board for her promotion to detective, she was the only individual in Hope Mills history to have to wait a year to be promoted to the position that she was in, when she finally did get it a year later, even though two of her Caucasian counterparts were promoted immediately above her. And to that end, she heard two different stories. One was a manning problem in the patrol department. The other was we were waiting for, another officer to retire. In either way, in either circumstance, she was the only one marginalized in that particular situation, and the only one from that day, before or after, that's been through something like that. But while she was waiting to be a detective, she had to work 12-hour shifts as a patrol officer. She was denied any new and necessary equipment on the auspices of her promotion, which I refer to as, dangling the carrot. We're not going to give you the promotion, but we're going to give you all the work associated with that and your normal job and not equip you at the same time. So she filed her first official grievance after watching several of her coworkers receive newer equipment, though less senior, after having to watch them endure being promoted to new positions and recognizing that these individuals didn't look like her. They were Caucasian, they were male, and they were getting promoted immediately in the same amount of time that she was waiting. And so, you had, and within that, when she finally was promoted, she received 300 cases, from another individual who was a non-protected staff, class individual, who was retired with honor, who didn't do his job, who left hundreds of cases that had not been worked. These are juvenile cases, children that had been victimized, cases all the way back to 2008 that she was receiving, some from other officers as well. And she was forced day one, on the job training to try to learn how to do her job and then take on having to clean up another individual who didn't do their job. But she was held to a different standard. So throughout the next 4 years, she produced, no less than 3 official grievances citing unfair workplace practices, glass ceiling for minorities and females, and discrimination and retaliation when her and other officers within that police department spoke up, to defend themselves. They were attacked, marginalized. Suddenly there was issues with their performance. Suddenly they were placed on, suspensions, or they had write-ups that would reduce them from, being able to promote. They were demoted. We have one African American who was demoted from in the police department. He's the only one I think ever that was demoted. And the commonality, the common link between all these individuals is for years they had perfect evaluations, outstanding, and the same people who were doing this within her chain of command were the same individuals signing these documents that were saying that these individuals were outstanding. My wife's, the point scale that she was on was 125 points. The last year she was there, she scored a 119 out of 125. And so then that year, she gets a perfect and outstanding, near perfect and outstanding evaluation. And then suddenly, out of the blue, comes audits from the top, right? After another individual got himself into trouble. So despite all these issues, she maintained her professionalism, advocated for victims. She was featured in the Fayetteville Observer. She received an award from the Child Advocacy Center 4 years in a row for the most forensic interviews ever conducted. She represented the police department, and now they want us and everyone to believe that in a 40 police officer department, which is rather small in military terms, somehow she's this suddenly horrible detective, did not deserve any of the awards she received. They're virtually saying they made a mistake in giving them to her. The certifications that she accomplished, North Carolina General Instructor's Course, bachelor's degree in criminal justice that she completed while she was there, and the performance evaluations that she was given. And mind you, prior to this, she was one of, I think, 33 or 34 ever female highway patrol officers. She worked for the highway patrol, went through one of the hardest training programs probably, in the States when it comes to, highway patrol officers. And very few females make it through that program because the standard is equal for all. And she made it, and she brought that professionalism to this police department. And instead, they took that and they destroyed her career and they destroyed her good name, which is what we're fighting to get back. So we fast forward to May 2020, and again, she spoke up against unfair workplace practices. She was given a bogus written reprimand for things that were not her fault. And this was, we believe, to support a favored officer do his job when he was on call. He failed to go to a juvenile sexual assault call, and he was the on-call detective. He said he wasn't going to go. And the mother of this victim was a Cumberland County Sheriff's deputy. She filed a formal complaint, and he was given a formal reprimand by his immediate supervisor because the upper chain of command would not do anything about it because he was part of a protected class within the police department. And what I mean by that is not a protected class citizen, but there's kind of a network of individuals within that are non-protected class individuals who kind of look out for each other up the chain of command. And he would often bypass it to these people. Well, they wouldn't write him up. So the immediate supervisor, who was an African American, did, right? So that put him on probation. He would not be allowed to, promote. And the belief at the time is that they were attempting to get rid of this supervisor who was African American and replace him with this individual, right? So now we fast forward, and now suddenly out of the blue, my wife gets a write up, and it comes from the top. It does not come from her immediate supervisor. It comes from the deputy chief through her captain. And this is for something that no one has ever been written up for. They said it was a, quote, random audit conducted on her case files. She received a written reprimand for which she challenged in a formal grievance. Every adverse action, including retaliation with probation during her grievance hearing, a suspension a week later, probation was implemented, and her termination shortly after this to include a private investigation was done. And these were designed to purposely damage her career and her good name. All of this came after her grievance. So I want to take a second and say that in space and time, understand that as of February 2020, you have perfect, outstanding evals. You're doing a great job. Everyone's saying high fives all around. You're doing a fantastic job. 119 out of 125, rock star performance. And then all of a sudden, your coworker, who's a non-protected class citizen that they're trying to put in your boss's place, who happens to be an African American, gets himself written up, gets himself into trouble. Suddenly, you receive a counseling out of the blue for something that's arbitrary from the top that no one has ever been written up for because they know they overtasked the division with cases. They just don't have enough detectives to work them. Suddenly, this problem's created. You file a grievance. You say, hey, I want to go through the grievance process. So you schedule, the town schedules a grievance hearing. You go into this grievance hearing. You spend the first hour of your time telling your chain of command all the things that you don't like about this police department in reference to its discrimination against minorities, against females, its unfair application of workplace practices, glass ceiling for employees. You've never had a female above the rank of sergeant ever in this police department. You've never had an African American who's been above the rank of sergeant except once chief of police, and he resigned because you forced him out. Like, minorities don't get an opportunity at higher echelons of authority in this place. And then you walk out of what's supposed to be a protected status event on probation. So you're punished, you're retaliated against. While that's going on, you find out later on after the fact that two separate investigations are done on you at the same time during this time period, unbeknownst to you. And a week later, she's put on suspension. So now the 16th of June, she's suspended. They hire an outside agency that destroys her credibility, attempts to anyway, and her good name at the behest of these individuals. And then in September, they terminate her. And mind you, in the middle of this, she had filed an EEOC complaint, with the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, and they still didn't care and fired her anyway. So there's other aspects of this that's happened within this particular instance with her, but I can't talk about those things because there's a confidential protective order that's in place. And everything that I'm talking about are things that have happened prior to that confidential protective order being issued. So I can't speak to those other things that would prove that that was the case and they intentionally tried to, damage and replace her. So I essentially looked at it as there's a counter narrative, and that's, based on my observance that the police department has good minority and female officers that are subjected to immature and unprofessional leadership that desires to ensure that minorities and females cannot promote into positions of higher authority. This is evident because there has only been one minority female in the position above the rank of sergeant ever in, or excuse me, one male ever above the rank of sergeant in Hope Mills PD's history. And it's because he was appointed by the town commission. He was not promoted from within. And then it ended up under some precarious circumstances I won't speak to on this talk show. They forced him out. And it was not because of anything. It was basically because it comes down to race, sex, gender, sexual preference, and other things. And they ended up forcing him out and replacing him again, yet again with a non-minority protected individual. So currently, what that all sums up to is that there's 2 active federal lawsuits right now filed for discrimination and retaliation by this police department against its minority and female officers. And I suspect that there will be more. And it's actually branched out in the town because we just became aware of another individual, a lady who for 10 years had been trying to get her business off the ground in the town of Hope Mills and leverage the grants that they're supposed to have for small business owners. And they denied her for 10 years. And finally, she got her business off the ground and approved to get some of that from the town after she filed multiple complaints for 10 years that they would not support her, but were supporting other non-protected class citizens as they started businesses up to and including this year the opening of a Fit for Life within the town of Hope Mills. So she has contacted us and has asked us, to give her an introduction into our attorney, because this would be the 3rd case against this town that minorities are filing. And I've tried to get the word out. I contacted my congressman. I contacted local legislation. I even contacted the FBI at one point because there were some other things that were happening. And obviously, I've never thought in 22 years of my career in serving my country, being shot at for my nation, in some of the most fierce, firefights going on at the time in the war on terrorism, trying to stop terrorists from coming in this country, that people would be doing this to my family. And that when I went and asked for help, that no one was really there to give it to me until I found Thomas Van Camp down in Pinehurst, who is now our attorney and who's representing us, and he's representing another individual who's filing a discrimination lawsuit against this town. I think that it's a compelling narrative that these individuals, they're horrible in their leadership. They want to maintain the status quo of non-protected status individuals staying in the positions they're in, to and include changing the positions so that people can't promote, not having a fair and equal boarding process, eliminating the process altogether, putting people into temporary positions and then promoting them without having it open to anyone else to apply to. So every trick in the book to keep people from being able to keep minorities and keep females and keep protected class citizens from being able to promote, and being able to have an equal opportunity at employment. It's the worst semblance of leadership I've ever seen, and it just takes you back to the years prior that our forefathers have fought, to ensure that we have fair and equal rights among all, and that the best individual, the most qualified individual, regardless of who they should be the ones getting, the job. And so, I had attached, when I sent my email up, I had attached some articles showing, who my wife was online and, the things that she had been recognized for. And I think that, she now works for a new police department. It's an entirely new environment. He's super supportive, the chief of police, awesomely professional environment, took my wife on knowing that this situation was happening. And he's a white guy. He's a non-protected status individual. And it shows you the difference. He wants to make her a lieutenant, potentially offer her, would be willing to offer her a position as the second in command deputy chief of the police department, except for the fact that the Hope Mills Police Department sent a Giglio letter to the DA's office to damage my wife's good name and sent a FB5 to the Training and Standards Division, which is now holding up her ability to get her badge back so she can work in another police department. And they want to make her the lead for all investigations. So you just look at the difference in what people will do and the lengths that they will go to ensure that the things that they want to accomplish, they're able to continue accomplishing. And so for me, a saying in Special Forces, De oppresso liber, we free the oppressed. And that's a motto we've always lived by. We did it after 9/11. We did it in Afghanistan. to prevent and keep, Al Qaeda from coming back and knocking down more buildings in our country after they killed our citizens, and then you look at this and you go, okay, well, the expectation is that if I'm willing to do that for my country, I'm going to do it for my family. And this is one small way that I can do it, which is my First Amendment right to free speech. And to let people know that I think it's an atrocity. I think it's in keeping with the worst traditions of America. I think that this disgraces military members because I am one and the husband of my wife, and they were doing this to my wife while I've been deployed. And I think that someone seriously needs to look into this. And honestly, I think they need to protest the town of Hope Mills and writ large. Honestly, I think that's the only way that you elevate this to a point where people will realize that this kind of conduct cannot happen in 2022. So, I'd like to take the time to thank whoever's listening to this, to hear it. I come from a family of immigrants, a mixed family, African American, and Italian. Every person in my family was hardworking, and we had our difficulties growing up too, but by and large, I was able to live a relatively decent and good life with a good upbringing, had a mother who really cared about me. And, I don't believe that this stuff, but one thing and one principle I've always lived by is that you stand up for the things that matter. This case, and whoever's listening to it, and I'm sure they will find it at some point and listen to it. And I want to be very clear that this case is not about money. It's not about a settlement. It's not about a back corner somewhere saying, "Oh, we won't admit fault," and you just take your money and walk on your way, and we're going to continue doing what we're doing. We're going to fight and take this before a jury of our peers and ensure that this is never allowed to happen to anyone ever again. And though we know that that won't be the case, at least this will be our contribution to it. Because I can't, in good faith, defend my country and not defend people who are being subjected to this kind of thing. So, I think now's the time that we take and seize the initiative, as we would say in warfare. So with that, yeah, thanks for taking the time to listen to what I have to say.
Hello, I am James, and I would like to reflect on my years of experience as being a Black employee within a particular agency. It appears I always got downplayed unconsciously by officials to choose a lower path for promotional opportunities, or I just would get passed over without me questioning their reasoning. So, through my journey with this particular agency, it always appears that whenever I put in for such opportunities like field training officer, I had attempted several times and got passed over. When I got wind of things of that particular process, I've noticed it was lesser experienced law enforcement personnel that had lesser amount of time and experience than myself. And even it turns out that, most of these individuals were of the white Caucasian persuasion, and other types of downplaying of my abilities would occur in some instances where, when it came to expressing the desire of promotional opportunities with such high officials, and it always appeared that I would get downplayed, like, "Oh no, maybe you should pick this secondary lower level of supervisory, and let this other person get this level." And my internal instinct is like, "Wow, I don't believe this. He's pretty much undermining me for my complex experiences that I bring," in which Randy had described in the introduction. So, with this particular agency, out of my 27 years of experience, I've worked with them for over 13 years, and it's just that the ultimate demographic numbers are majority Caucasian, and we have still a few Hispanics and a few Asian, but the representation of Blacks that I considered is very underserved in this particular agency in some of the metropolitan areas and communities. That is still poses a problem. So with that, my other second point would be, as a Black person with my diverse experience in superior education, it does not seem to matter when an institution wants to select a qualified candidate as long as they have a non-discriminatory reason to stand on. So I must say that I've experienced this EEO process just within a couple years, where I was in fact passed over for a official leadership type of position that was involving where this person who I trained and know beyond reason I had superior experience over. And with this particular agency, we have civilian managers that pretty much too can regulate the program of law enforcement and make decisions in law enforcement matters. So at any rate, this particular civilian manager passed me over and selected who she wanted, in which it was a Caucasian individual. And so while going through the EEO process, to make a long story short, it appears that a lot of points during the report of investigation phase was discovered. It revealed that I was in fact the qualified candidate out of the, let's say, the candidate of 4 that was on the ranking profile. So the report of investigation process did reveal that there were interview notes were missing. There was deviation from the selection procedures. And then in fact, this manager did show favoritism and failed to recuse herself. And the other thing is other selection panel members of 3, one did not provide any documentation. The other individual, he wrote unfavorable interview comments, unfavorable comments regarding the person that was selected over me. But at any rate, it was just really appalling. And it just appeared that from this EEO experience, I was just surprised that it appears that none of that even mattered. So with that in mind, it's just that what I mean by none of that even mattered is just that as long as they had a non-discriminatory reason to stand on, I mean, that's what the process revealed to me, that it still it doesn't matter. It's like it doesn't quite hold management or the agency responsible for that. So, and this was kind of a gut-wrenching thing that me that's in a supervisory capacity, and just like, wow, so I could just basically pick anybody, long as it's just if it's a non-discriminatory reason, then I should be good. So but at least I must say that I taught that official a high credible lesson. So I would tell anybody to still do not get discouraged of the EEO process. It's still a tool to challenge and address your grievances. It's still a vehicle for your grievances in attempting to hold officials accountable. But it's just sad that the EEO system, to me, needs room of serious improvement in their processes and helping underserved ethnicities. I would just keep it direct. Particularly, it seems that individuals in the Black community, they are underserved within my agency. So that's the point of me expounding on saying that less than qualified candidates still have a chance of being selected as long as the management can use non-discriminatory reasons to stand on. So just in my opinion, I believe that part of the EEO system needs to be strengthened and fixed. And my next point would be the EEO system seems to be used as a shield to buy time for management officials to clean up their acts. And that's just my personal assessment of the process. And I must say that my experience exposed a lot of unfair practices by management officials. So just from my experience of just going through the processes of, the initial filing process and mediation, and then eventually during the administrative hearing process with the EEO judge, and it's just seemed like those issues of unfair practices that was already disclosed in the report of investigation. It just still appeared that none of that mattered. And I should have brought this up early, even though my case was just involved a non-selection process. So it's just kind of falls back on the principle of, as long as management has a non-discriminatory reason to stand on, your case is pretty much weak regardless. It's like all the other discoverable things, it still doesn't matter. So that's a major problem area that the EEO system needs to improve and make things helpful in providing additional resources of judges, regulatory enforcement personnel that can really help make the things more workable and powerful for underserved people that have been abused by unfair practices. So again, that's justification of my experience of expounding on, based on my personal experience again, is that I think the EEO system seems to be a shield for management to buy time to clean up their acts. And even though, my case exposed a lot of unfair practices, that still the EEO system didn't quite address to my need. But at any rate, I've still figure I still came out as a winner, because I still got promoted after that process within 3 months, which kind of made me like a victim of my own success. But I still went along through the process just to, to stand on my principles and continue to make my voice be heard and stand on my grievances appropriately. So with those areas that I've already expressed about my experience, then I would just close by just saying that I hope someone is listening out there, and I hope I can share a positive impact to don't be discouraged about the EEO process. It's like everything else in life. There's always room for improvement. So hope my experience reflect on that. Thank you, Randy, for the mic.
Hello, everyone. You've heard from Antoinette, an East Coast law enforcement official who was dedicated, very capable, and did great work. But because of her demographic status, she was stymied, harassed, and eventually fired, lost her job. And she's fighting back. Then you heard from Carl, a military officer currently on duty, serving our nation, risking his life. You heard his words. Even as he's out there doing whatever he has to do, he has to worry about his wife, protecting his wife. From what? Unlawful discrimination. And then you heard from James. He's on the West Coast, a law enforcement official. And he said the same things. For him, regardless of whatever he does, he cannot advance. He's stymied, he's hindered in promotions. And why? Because they always keep coming up with the excuse that you're never good enough. But yet people that are lesser qualified than he have done far less for law enforcement or even for our nation, they get promoted. I share all this with you because as part of the North Star Report, we're here to shed the light on discrimination. Think to yourself, for generations have we not had situations where you're never good enough? Minorities and women, you know what I'm saying. And for all people, because discrimination can go in different directions, including age and so forth. But it happens. And it's not right because it robs our nation of our best and finest. It robs organizations. It takes away dreams. It shatters dreams. We need to do better as a society. We need to understand that we are Americans and we're looking out for our nation. And anyone that supports that, we should support, regardless of their race, their gender, their whatever their differences, as long as they stand with us. Unfortunately, some people don't see it that way. Think about it. In our lifetime, we've had different seasons. It's like it always comes back. The latest season involved Ferguson, George Floyd. We're talking about the law enforcement industry. I'm not attacking law enforcement per se, because there's plenty of very excellent law enforcement officials, plenty of wonderful police stations where people are treated fairly and with dignity regardless of who they are. But just like any barrel of apples, there's going to be some bad apples. And it results in nothing but destruction. If we can change the systems, we can change the people. If we can change the way people use the system, we can change the way people behave within that system. Think about it. The purpose of the North Star Report is to bring to you light, the light of understanding. Why do things happen as they do? Well, this is a brief introduction. In our future shows, we intend to provide you with information on different industries. We're certainly, as James had mentioned, we're certainly going to take on the EEO, the Equal Employment Opportunity, Civil Rights, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, all of that. That's an industry where you're supposed to expect justice and truth and so forth. We have stats, we have documented data, and we also have testimony. All of that will be presented in our future talk shows. We'll also look at other aspects of our society. Aviation. Aviation is the future. You know, we went from horse-drawn carriages or walking, to now, driving. The next wave is aviation. And there's some things you need to know. Airline pilots, for example. If you're a black airline pilot, your odds of success in achieving your career goals are significantly diminished as compared to what it could be if you were not of that demographic group. We'll go on and we'll explore not just what's happening, but the reasons why things are happening. In conclusion, I will say this. We're not here to save the day. We must all save the day. The time for heroes and martyrs, that's over. They won't allow that to happen. But we, as individuals, can unite or work as individuals to reveal the truth even further. Take a look at the demographic. When you look at law enforcement, take a look at the demographic breakdown of the law enforcement officials that govern your community. Compare that to the demographics of the community and look at the policies that they live by. I'm not attacking all law enforcement agencies. I'm not supporting defund the police or anything like that. What I'm saying is that there's systems in place that are designed to maintain unlawful discrimination. We must look deeper. We must come to understand that it's not just a coincidence or just a happenstance or it's just that person or that person. It could be any of us. If we don't take a look at the system and try to change it, we will all be victims in some manner, shape, or form. So in conclusion, I say take responsibility and follow our talk shows. We will reveal more and more as we proceed. But for now, I must say good night, and I hope that you will follow through on seeing the subsequent talk shows that we present. This was our first, and we have a lot more to share. We are the North Star Report, and this is the North Star Report talk show. Thank you.
This wraps up our show for today. If you have a story to share, please reach out to us by our email, nsr4u@thenorthstarreport.com. You are not alone, and together we can turn the tide of discrimination through knowledge and, above all, unity. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Remember to keep your eye on the prize, and we'll keep lighting the way. Thanks for watching.